Hey guys, welcome to my very first YouTube video. My name's Matt, and beside me here I've got a 1984 60 Series Land Cruiser. This year I'm going to be building it up in memory of my late father Bob into a vehicle he'd be proud of. I'm going to be taking my years of experience building full drives along with a bunch of parts from various vehicles, putting them all together and creating the ultimate vehicle. If you stick around for the series, we're going to go through every step from buying all the parts, including this car, all the way through to getting it fully engineered and registered. And along the way I'll show you a bunch of tips and tricks I've picked up to make your life easier if you want to do something similar at home. Most people that know me know that I'm a Hilux guy. I've built a whole business around customizing Hiluxes, so picking a 60 Series Land Cruiser might be a bit strange. So what most people don't know is my first car was actually a 60 Series. I grew up full driving in a 60 with my old man. He taught me to drive in one and then passed it on to me when I turned 17. We got it back on the road together. I ended up getting rid of that car and obviously got a Hilux. But when it came to building a car in memory of my old man, I couldn't think of a better platform.
Here's a few shots I could get together of some of the cars Dad had over the years. He loved his Toyotas and getting out and having a good time. I threw in some clips I had of Dad and his Hilux in recent years doing some trips with me and my mates.
Blockers on. Little bit. Keep driving. Go, Dad, go.
Go the big dog.
What are you doing, mate? See? I'm taking the f***ing hard line.
Nah, I think you just rear kicked it out, but you should have started that. He's really sweet. Oh, if he's all good then.
Straighten up a little bit there, Bob. Pick up a wheel, mate. That way. What are you doing, mate?
Oh, you mad dog, keep going. Why?
What do you reckon, mate?
I'm just singing straddle until I get as far as I can, then just hammer it.
Lovely. Show me how it's done, mate. So for this build, we're going to be using parts from a bunch of different cars. We're going to be using the shell from the 60. We're going to be using a Range Rover Classic chassis. We're going to be using the motor and box out of a Commodore. We're going to be using the diffs out of a 105 Series Land Cruiser and a few various little things here and there as well. But once they're all pieced together, in my eyes, it's going to be a pretty good car. So the first question is obviously going to be, why are we changing the chassis? There's nothing wrong with the 60 chassis. So the way I look at it is if we're going to be pulling the front and rear diffs out and changing them out with custom suspension, and we're going to rip the motor and gearbox out and change them out with new mounts, the only thing left on the chassis that we haven't chopped off is the body mounts. So if there's a better chassis we can use, it's not really a lot more work to simply put some cab mounts on it while we're going. The rest of the work we'd have to do to this chassis anyway, so if we can do it to a different chassis and just put cab mounts on to put this body on that chassis, it makes it better. So I've picked a Range Rover Classic chassis for a few reasons. The main reason is I recently bought a camper trailer for my family to go camping in, and these have got a tow rating of 2, I think, or maybe 2.5 ton. But the Range Rovers have got 4 ton, which not a lot of people know about. So it sort of means that, you know, I'm future-proofing the build. You know, if I buy a big caravan or we get a boat or a comp truck and a car trail or anything like that, this will be able to do it because it'll be legal. Whereas, you know, obviously you'd be pushing the limits with a 2.5 ton or 2 ton towing capacity. Now, I've never used a Range Rover Classic for a build before. I've never even worked on one, to be honest. But I've seen them around, and I've sussed out a lot of cars over the years, and I've always thought that would be a good chassis to use if I ever did a build. And the main reason I looked at that as, you know, a good base would be the fact that the chassis rails on all cars are quite narrow at the front, where the wheels have got to have a bit more clearance so they can turn. And then they usually taper out and run really wide at the back. Now, building full drives here at work, I've found that when you go to put custom suspension in the back, if you want like long travel shocks, coilovers or anything flash like that, they end up quite narrow together because they've got to be between the chassis rails. But the benefit of a Range Rover chassis is it's parallel front to back. So they're narrower at the front here and they stay narrow all the way to the back. So it'll mean the suspension on the outside at the front will also be able to be on the outside of the chassis at the back, which obviously the wider you can get your springs and shocks on the chassis, the more stable the car will be automatically. No different to the way, you know, I'm standing now. Versus if I widen my stance, I'm a lot more stable if someone tried to push me versus putting my shocks on the inside of the chassis and my springs. And then I'm obviously going to be a bit more prone to moving around. And another thing I hadn't actually picked up until I've been working on the chassis in the shed is the back actually swings up. Whereas, I don't know if you guys are familiar on like Land Cruisers, Patrols, Hiluxes, basically all of them, the chassis usually goes over the rear wheel arch, dips back down and then just stays horizontal to the back of the car where the tow bar would be. Whereas these sort of arc back up, which means when you're out full driving, if you go up a rock step or something and the back wants to like dip down and hit the ground, it's not going to dig in as much because it's going to be, you know, radiusing with that rather than just being like plowing into the ground, tow bar digging in and just stopping the car quite abruptly. So for the motor and box, we're going to be using an LS3 and 6-speed automatic out of a Commodore. I selected that because they've got good power out of the box. I think it's about 400 horsepower that LS comes with, and then the 6-speed auto, you know, it's built for it. Having the 6 speeds means the first gear is really low, so it'll be really good in the rocks, like rock crawling and driving up, you know, technical stuff. But then it gives it a lot of options as it gets into the higher speed stuff, so it'll keep the revs down and, you know, hopefully save a bit of fuel. I wanted to put the LS3 in this because I'm a fan of the fact that, you know, it has a lot of power from factory. That's how it was designed. It's not like we've had to go and change this, change that, and do all these things, which then potentially, if done wrong or, you know, the wrong selection of parts, might become a bit unreliable. You know, I plan to drive this, you know, around the country, all over the place, doing whatever. I don't want to have to worry about, you know, oh, I had to do this once before, so now I've always got to keep an eye on it, or these temps because I've got a turbo, or this, that. It's a standard motor, dropped in, big power out of the box. You can't go wrong in my eyes. So I've chosen to go with 105 series diffs over, you know, the common GU or 80 series diffs for a few reasons. So if we compare the 80 diff with the 105 diff, in the front, they're basically the same diff. They're the same width, they've got the same center, same axles. The only difference is these little studs down here are actually upgraded to 10mm instead of 8mm, which is a big thing because if you've ever put 35s on, you know, a 60, a Hilux, an 80, you probably have experienced someone breaking those studs off because they're not really up to it. You can buy upgraded studs, you can drill them out and put 10mm studs in, but it's a lot easier to start with the hub that's meant to have it. In the back, there's a few upgrades as well. Obviously, they've got the 10mm stud upgrade as well compared to the 8mm studs on the drive flanges out on the axles. The center is the same center essentially, but the axles themselves have actually got a bigger spline. The axle is bigger. So by running a 105 diff, I get the assurance that the axles are actually stronger from factory. It's not just the same axle, maybe a bit different width or whatever, like most sort of generations of cars are. They actually beefed them up. And it's the same in a 79, and obviously, you know, guys are really loading them up. They're putting big power through those V8s and they're up to it. Later on down the track, it's not a big deal to put chromo axles in if I want as well, because you can just slide the axle out, slide the new axle in, and you're done. It's not like if you start with a GU diff and you want to upgrade to a better axle, because they're known for breaking axles too, you've got to do this big conversion. It's big money. It changes the whole rear setup versus just simply slide an axle out, slide an axle in, done. So what we're actually going to do to the front diff as well is we're going to cut the front center out and we're going to put a GU front center in. The GU front centers are much stronger than the 80-105 centers, as people have probably experienced. They're a lot smaller. It keeps all the axles and everything the same. It doesn't like make weird spares or anything. The only parts we have to change is within the locker, whether it's a TJM Pro locker, an ARB Air locker, or an E locker. You just have to change the side gears out within the locker to suit the different spline, because the spline on the GU Patrol axle is different to the Toyota axle. But conveniently, they're in the same spot, so it's quite simple that you just slot them out, drop them in, axles go in, and you've got yourself a GU center with the Toyota outers. You know, at home, you know, there's probably a bunch of guys yelling at their TV saying, why didn't you just put GU diffs under it? Well, there's a few reasons I picked Toyota diffs over the GU stuff, and that's not to try and, you know, keep it all the same brand or anything. The main thing in the rear is I like having the offset housing with the center offset to the driver's side, the same as the front. In the Patrol, it's obviously centered. The tail shaft's not a worry. I could have just put a different transfer in to suit that. The main thing I like that is when you envision the housing with center offset, it sort of gives you a few lines when you're going through the rocks. It's not just, if there's a rock in the middle of the track and your diff's in the middle, you're obviously going to hit it. If you move over left or right, you've only got like a fixed distance of whatever that is and whatever that is to try and clear it before your tyre hits the rock, which you may, you know, be off track by then. By having the diff center offset, it gives you more options, because you can either move one side and it gives you more area to slide the rock through the gap between your tyre and your diff center. Or if you move it this way, the car's only got to go, you know, a small distance over before the tyre's now running on the rock, and it'll lift the center up and over. But with the diff center in the middle, you've got the same distance either side. So if the rock doesn't fit between the tyre and the diff center on this side, it's not going to fit on the other side, and you probably can't shift the car like a whole car length to the side, or you're going to be off the track. So that's a sort of a hidden benefit that I really like. The other one too is obviously when you're pushing your diffs through like a muddy rut, you're not pushing two different grooves. The front's going to be doing the work and the rear's going to be sort of doing the same work, because they're in the same path. Pretty much, it's a little bit different. Another thing I like about the Cruiser diffs on the rear is they've got the full floating bearing setup. So you can, you know, just adjust your wheel bearings just like you do on the front. It's not like a fixed bearing on the axle pressed in, bolt in like a Hilux. I like that because, you know, it's adjustable. If you have an axle issue, it doesn't mean you have to lose the wheel. Probably one of the main reasons I didn't pick them is they're obviously wider than a Toyota diff, but the Toyota diffs are already a lot wider than these diffs. It's going to be a bit silly on this car. So transfer case wise, I'm actually going to run a 80 series transfer in this. I'm going to leave it full-time, full drive for a while and just give it a try. When I was growing up, I was driving my dad's 80 series a lot on my Ps, because my 60 series, you know, I couldn't afford to run it. And I used to like driving it, like, you know, used to drive pretty hard in the dirt and stuff when we used to go motorcycle riding. And in full-time, full drive, like, it was a good car. I do think that having a bit more power than like a standard 80 series, it might be a bit prone to spinning the front inside wheel around a corner in the wet or whatever. And if that is the case, I'll just put a part-time kit in it. It's not gonna have to, you know, come out and change all the tail shafts and everything, so it's not the end of the world. But it is something I'd like to try. For suspension, I'm gonna keep the front radius arm. Obviously this is on leaf springs, but I'm more talking about the diffs. The front diff should be mostly unchanged. I'm gonna leave it radius arms. I'll build some custom radius arms to suit, you know, the chassis setup that we end up with, because obviously I'm not just gonna bolt 80 series radius arms in. And in the rear, we're going to 4-link the suspension, because if we're going to all this work, we might as well make it the best we can. We'll go through 4-linking and geometry and even setting up radius arms and stuff when we come to that later on in the build. And on that, if there's anything you guys want to see a bit more in depth on that maybe, you know, you have a few questions about, you're not too sure, or might get glossed over a lot, leave a comment below. I'll make sure that when I get to that step, I'll try and film it and do a bit more description on it to help you guys at home. So in terms of springs and shocks, we're going to be running coilovers with bypasses in all 4 corners. The main reason for that is I didn't want to sort of half-ass this, and I want this to be able to do everything. You know, if I want to go out west and maybe one day do like a low-level navigation race, I don't want to have to rebuild the car to suit, or I don't want to also be up the Cape and just be vibrating apart. Like, while I'm going to this much effort, it's not like a lot more work to do it. Obviously the suspension itself is going to be really expensive, but to put some decent shocks in it anyway is already quite expensive. So to go to that next level, it's not a lot more, and the benefits are huge. So we'll go through that when it comes to it, and I'll explain sort of the main reasons why, but that's what we're going to be using. We're obviously going to be building custom bar work all the way around, you know, to protect it, wheel carrier, all the sort of standard things that you need, winch. We're going to be doing a bunch of electrical, obviously, because we've got to wire up the motor conversion, lights, all the accessories for the car. We've got to fit all them. If this seems like the kind of thing you're going to be interested in, or you might have a mate that'd be interested in, make sure you share it, because I really want this to reach as many people as we can, because my old man was a trainer and he used to love training people and teaching them anything he could. He did a bunch of different courses. He used to volunteer his time on weekends doing courses for free for like full drive clubs and stuff. So that's why I'm doing this. He always used to say that I should try and, run a course at work in my free time, but I didn't really have that much free time. So this is my way to try and use my free time I have at night and teach as many people as I can some of the things I've picked up along the way. So if you've got mates that are building their full drive at home but don't watch too much YouTube, maybe let them know. That might be helpful if they do watch an episode about whatever the step they're doing at the moment. So I started buying parts for this around Christmas time. I bought this probably only a couple of weeks ago, but all the other stuff I've been acquiring since Christmas. I've already got a chassis, I've got the diffs front and rear, I've got a transfer case, I bought a blown up 6-speed auto to use for mock-up, and I already had a LS1, which is only a 5.7, but they're actually the same dimensions. So I've bolted the blown up 6-speed to the back of the LS1, and I'm going to use that for mock-up in this, because I didn't really want to buy a really expensive engine and then have it sit around in the workshop for ages until we got to using it, and it'll still help with engine mounts and stuff. And then when it comes to it and it's ready, I can pull that out and sell it, and then I can buy the motor that I actually need and put that in, and it should sort of stay in there for good. So over the Christmas break, I found a bunch of parts. Actually, it was really convenient. I got on Marketplace and I found a Range Rover Classic that wasn't too expensive. I went and picked it up out west, brought it back here. I've parted it out and actually made my money back, so that's sweet because I got a chassis for free basically. Once I brought the Range Rover back, I got it in the workshop, lifted the cab off, rolled the diffs out, and went to town on it for a weekend, cutting every bracket off it basically. Cut all the body mounts off, all the old suspension mounts, everything except a few cross members that were welded in. Ground it all back, so it's basically just 2 bare chassis rails with 3 cross members. So I picked up some 105 series diffs from a fella on Facebook as well. The transfer case I picked up from a fella up the road wrecking an 80, that was no dramas. But the main thing I needed was obviously a 60 series. I didn't really want to rush out and buy the first one I found and then, find out that it was full of rust or I paid too much and a better one came up or anything like that. So I actually put the feelers out there and tried to find one that somebody might have had that was like full of rust, an old project that they were going to throw away or something that I'd be able to use in the mock-up stages to do cab mounts, mount the engine and make sure it fits under the tunnel, put the diffs in and cycle the suspension and all that, while I waited for a 60 to show up that was actually worth buying. I got onto a guy from Facebook named Ben. I've met Ben a few times up at some comps in Queensland, and he was nice enough to let me know that he had a 60 series in his paddock that was absolutely full of rust, and I was welcome to have it. It was just rotting away in a paddock. So that was really good of him. I had a mate up in Queensland with my car trailer, and he was coming back about a week or so later, so I got him to pick it up and bring it down for me. I brought it here to the workshop, I pulled the cab off, rolled the chassis out, cut that up, put it in the scrap bin. I've got the diffs there I've got to send back up to Ben because he wants to use them for another 40 series he's building, I think. And now I've got a really rusty 60 series cab that's not really good for anything, but it's good enough for me to be able to sit on the new chassis, work out mounts, what will fit where, etc. The next thing I did was I sat the body on. It wasn't perfectly square and like lined up and bolting on or anything like that. All I did was sit it on there to make sure that the measurements I'd taken from the drawings I found on the net actually worked and the chassis could be used under this cab, because obviously it's never been done. I've got no idea that certain things might clash that you can't see until you go to do it. So that was what I did. Before I spent any money on any special parts or anything, I just put them together purely just to see what would work where and what will happen. I rolled the diffs under to make sure they're lined up in the wheel arches and they're not going to smash into the chassis before they get to full up travel or something weird like that. And it actually worked out pretty good.
Love the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted, stay humble.
So the next step was to get someone out here to scan all the parts I was going to use. I got him to scan the steering box, the chassis rails that I had there, the whole bottom of the 60 series cab, the front and rear diffs, and the engine and gearbox.
Better believe in your mind, cause it's everything. You can mold, shape, find almost anything. All it takes is some time and some clarity to find your identity. It's mind over everything.
Then I just spent basically every night for a month or so on the computer after dinner, and hours and hours on CAD, drawing up all the brackets I'm going to need on the chassis, like all the chassis plating, all the suspension mounts, mounts on the diff, shock mounts, steering box, panhard, basically everything. So essentially now I've got a digital copy of the car being done. I haven't actually done any of the work, but now we've got sort of a concept there. I've got all the parts done, so it should go together pretty easy when it comes to that time. And while I touch on that, the CAD thing is a lot simpler than people probably think. So I'm probably going to do a separate episode on it because there's a bit in it, but just on how easy it is to do at home. Converting a bracket that you need from just a sketch on a bit of paper to a piece of metal not only takes a long time, but it never ends up really as nice as it probably could be, you know, trying to radius the edges with a grinder, it's a bit rough, and it takes a really long time. So I'll go through how easy it is to convert that sketch you have or a few measurements you took on your phone or whatever onto the computer and order it and get it delivered to your house. It's not actually a big job, and it means that, you know, if you jot that down on Wednesday and when you get home, do your drawing and you send it off, Friday you might have the parts rather than wait till Saturday and then spend 3 hours on a grinder making this sub-quality part that you probably could have been better off moving to the next step if you just tack the bracket in. So we'll go through that in the next episode.